Hi guys, so today's video is very much intended to be a part of a conversation, a dialogue, a debate, a discussion. So get ready to use your keyboards because I want to talk about something that I think constantly crops up and that I have thoughts on, and it's sort of who we choose to put on pedestals as inspirational figures, and in this case in particular, inspirational women. So this discussion is inspired by this book, which you might have seen. It's been very heavily publicised, it's all over the bookstores, and it is Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. And I wanted to pick this up, I thought it looked amazing, I spent my own money on it and was so excited to flick through. Unfortunately, I'm coming at this book from a bit of a critical position. I was disappointed by what I found within the pages, and that's not to say that I am criticising anybody who does like this book. It has a very admirable objective. There are indeed lots of inspirational and fascinating figures explored in this book, some interesting information, and one of its main selling points, beautiful illustrations. Absolutely stunning. I can't get over how beautiful a book this is, if nothing else. However, like I said, I was disappointed, and there's one main reason for that, and that is that some of the women in this book, I would question why they are there. And that is what has inspired the wider discussion that we're going to get into in this video. So I'm going to focus on one example from this book. There are, however, other women in this book that it has been pointed out perhaps should not be there. This, however, is the women that I came across at first that really bothered me and made me question the general outlook of this book and kind of what the reasoning was behind why we chose certain women. So obviously we can talk about everybody in this book. Please feel free to leave comments, like I said, but I want to concentrate on one just to give a in-depth analysis of that person's inclusion and then go on to a wider discussion, and that is of course Margaret Thatcher. As soon as I saw this, I felt angry, I have to say. I felt angry, and you know, here's why. If you're not familiar, Margaret Thatcher was the first female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. She was the leader of the Conservative Party, and she was Prime Minister for 11 years between 1979 and 1990. So where can I start? Obviously I have a lot of criticisms of Margaret Thatcher as a Prime Minister. A lot of her policies were incredibly detrimental to the lives of people in the United Kingdom at the time and have also continued to impact the country even until now. She got rid of free milk in schools for children, which was heavily criticised and is actually mentioned in the book. She tried to introduce the poll tax, which was an incredibly unfair system of taxing people in the United Kingdom that was eventually eradicated through objections and protest by people, which I'd also like to point out she introduced early in Scotland, as if we're some sort of cross-section of the UK that you can just experiment your policies on before implementing them everywhere else. She was, of course, infamously responsible for the closures of the pits in the UK, the coal pits, which resulted in thousands of job losses. Not to mention her treatment of the miners during the time in which they were striking, and those job losses that resulted from her deindustrialisation of the United Kingdom are still again impacting communities today, where there is still massive lacks of jobs in areas where they used to be sort of industrial towns and cities. She led a massive campaign of privatising public services during her time as Prime Minister. She allowed people to buy their council homes, which I don't know whether you disagree or agree with the purchasing of council homes, but she did not during that time then replace those now sold off council homes with more social housing. And right now the United Kingdom has a massive shortage of social housing, which is a continuation of what Thatcher began. She was also responsible for implementing Section 28 to local government law which prohibited the discussion of homosexuality, any sexuality, out with heterosexuality in schools. In fact, I'll tell you exactly what that act said, which wasn't even repealed that long ago. A local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality. Promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. This is an inspiring rebel woman, according to this book. So as you can already tell, I am deeply opposed to a lot of the things that Margaret Thatcher did, and I feel they had a very negative impact on the country. And preempting some of the discussion that might go on, I don't oppose to teaching children or adults about historical figures. I'm a historian. I think we should teach people about everybody. You certainly couldn't do a political history of the United Kingdom without exploring Margaret Thatcher as a person and in her role as Prime Minister. But this book isn't a breakdown of powerful women in history. That's not what this book is marketed as. The title, as it suggests, is Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. It also reads on the back, Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls reinvents fairy tales inspiring children with the stories of 100 heroic women. And it opens with the lines, to the rebel girls of the world, dream bigger, aim higher, fight harder, and when in doubt, remember you're right. So am I expected to apply all of these sentiments to a person like Margaret Thatcher? I would firstly question heroic or rebellious, given that she was a Conservative politician, and the idea of heroic because obviously I see her as actually having harmed people's lives, and also this sentence, and when in doubt remember you're right. Now I don't think it's wrong to teach young girls to fight for what they believe in, but that sentiment we then apply to all the people in this book, it wouldn't even make sense. There are people in this book who fought for things that are in deep, deep contradiction with the things that Margaret Thatcher believed in. So I do question this, and I question the idea of this being an inspirational woman in a book that we might see as a piece of feminist literature. Margaret Thatcher was also notably anti-feminism, and I'm not really sure what she did for women in general. The reason Margaret Thatcher is included in this book is because she was powerful. It's because she was in charge of a country. But this is where my question comes in. Why does that make somebody inspirational? Is this really the kind of thing we want to teach young people and old people to aspire to? Power. For power's sake, and the very fact of attaining power as a woman as being an achievement regardless of what you do with that power. Because I don't think it is. And thus we're going to look deeper into the text of this page. First up, my big gripe, this paragraph. When she took free milk away from primary school children, the people disliked her. It's true. When she won the war against Argentina in the Falkland Islands, people admired her strength and determination. Some people probably did. I can't say that everybody alive in the 1980s was opposed to war with the Falklands, but many were, and there was huge outcries against the war in the Falklands, and call me crazy, but I find it really hard to believe that the families sitting around their kitchen table in the morning, considering the fact that the milk that their children was given at school had been taken away from them, were thinking, well, at least we went to war. Some of them might, but a lot of them probably weren't, and to kind of put those things side by side implies that universally one was objected to and one was consented to, and that people didn't mind that they took the milk away from children because of the war. The word determination often also comes up in discussions of Margaret Thatcher. This idea that, okay, she did some bad things, but let's admire her determination. I in general object to this premise. I don't think we should admire people simply for the very fact of being determined. I think what people are determined to do is what we should admire or not admire them for. So take Women Against Pit Closures. The Women Against Pit Closures was a political movement that rose up during the time in which the miners were on strike in opposition to Margaret Thatcher's deindustrialisation policies. And during 1984 and 1985, Women Against Pit Closures encouraged and empowered women to take part in the political and public role that is often seen as dominated by men and stand up for what they believed in. These women, like the men and all of the families that were going through the strike, didn't have money to pay for their gas, electricity, and even food. These women, since we're talking about a book about inspiring women, were going to food banks to feed their family. They were being treated like scum by the political elite. And as a network, they were fighting to save jobs and through that save lives. These women actually lost out on what I would say are pretty much basic human rights to fight for what they believe in. What did Margaret Thatcher lose out on? Because to me she seems like a pretty powerful and wealthy woman during her time as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Two women, a group of women, a movement, and one woman in opposition to one another, both determined, and I personally can't admire both of them for their determination. I would rather admire the women whose goals and intentions I believe in and respect, as opposed to the woman whose determination led her to destroy lives. And generally the phrasing in the page about Margaret Thatcher in this book and some of the other objectionable people in this book makes me feel just a little bit underwhelmed by the text in the book in general. It makes me just feel a little bit like we're not giving people all the information, we're just kind of saying what we feel like saying, and it doesn't put a lot of trust in me and as a reader, even though I do confess there are lots and lots and lots of women in this book that I do admire, that I do think are inspirational figures, and that I can completely see why they deserve to be here. But as you can see, that is one of my problems with that book, and it's just a general thing that, like I said, I feel like we privilege power and determination in these aspects of character sometimes over people's intentions and what they do. And a lot of women that I find inspiring through history, groups of women, movements organised by women and individuals, didn't have a lot of power. They were pretty ordinary women that I perhaps can identify a lot more closely with and don't really get talked about that much. Which leads me to the next part of this discussion, and this is kind of our focus on individuals in general. Now, I don't think it's wrong to have role models or individuals that we are inspired by or look up to. I definitely do. I think it's hard not to, and I think especially if you're part of a marginalised group or a group that is often oppressed, it's important to see yourself in people, say in the media, as being able to do things, and I completely get why we talk about individuals, but at the same time, do we perhaps sometimes sacrifice talking about movements and groups and privilege talking about individuals, and is that necessarily the right thing to do? So perhaps something I would have liked to see in this book is a group of women, including women, like for example the Ford sewing machinist strikers. In 1968, a group of women working in the Ford factories as sewing machinists went out on strike, something that was very much seen as a political act of men. These women went out on strike because their jobs had been deemed less skilled than the more skilled pay bracket, which resulted in them being paid less. But this then became part of a larger discussion on the fact that women in general were being paid less than men. And it was one of the triggers that led to the 1970 Equal Pay Act in the United Kingdom, which enshrined the rights of men and women to have equal working conditions and pay. Now, we still have issues with gender discrimination in the workplace and the pay gap in the United Kingdom, but this victory was that. It was a victory, and it did have an impact on how we see the roles of men and women in the workplace. And there are plenty more examples of this. One book that I do have is called Inspiring Women. I'm not sure if you can still get this book, but it was commissioned by the STUC's Women's Committee, the STUC being the Scottish Trade Union Council, and I'll link their social media and website and everything down below so you can explore their organisation more. But like the title of this book suggests, it is exploring inspiring women. But what this book does is explore movements and groups of women who stood up for important causes. So on the topic of equal pay, there are other women who went out on strike during World War II for equal pay. Then there are the women who, as part of the TUC, the General Trade Unions Council, who organised a protest of 80,000 people, many women included, who protested against attacks on women's right to choose in 1979, which was at the time recognised as the largest protest for women's rights in the UK. There are so many wonderful political movements, including women and groups of women who have fought for the rights of workers, for women, for people of different races, of sexualities, of gender identities across time and history. And why aren't we talking about them? Why is it always about the individual? It's not saying that it's bad to talk about individuals, but it's also important to talk about groups. And one of the major reasons for this is because if we constantly put individuals up on pedestals, it is incredibly hard for most people to see themselves in their shoes. We can't all be the Prime Minister, we can't all be the President, we can't all be the first woman to fly an aeroplane or go into space, but we can as individuals be active in our communities and in our countries to try and improving the situation of those around us and the world in general. We might not all gain massive glory or power or money through doing any of these things, but we can be part of wider movements, we can be part of groups, we can work together as a part of our everyday lives to do what we can. So perhaps talking more about movements of ordinary women who perhaps didn't garner fame from their actions is also really important to inspiring other women to be rebellious girls. But now I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear about women who have inspired you. Individuals or groups or movements, and those movements don't have to be exclusively of women. There are certainly a lot of men who have also inspired me as a woman. Let's talk about what inspires us. Let's talk about who we should inspire, the nuances of this discussion and this debate, and what we should be talking about when we talk about inspiring figures and feminist figures and feminism and what we're really aiming for. That's what I want to talk about, all of that stuff, everything. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So do please leave your comments down below. I hope you have enjoyed this discussion, the bad, the good, and the slightly less decided. On that note, I'm sure this video is epically long at this point, so I'm going to go. I hope you are all enjoying 2018 so far, and I will see you all again soon. Bye!